Today's webinar is engaging students who have been impacted by trauma and adversity. And my name is Liz Tomka. I'll be leading the first part of today's webinar. I am a licensed clinical social worker, specifically with background in school social work, and I returned to work at Mercy Home about 7 years ago, and I work in the academy, which provides academic support to our youth who are in residence, and so I work on a team of people that provide that support. So want to introduce you to Mercy Home. We have been around for 130 years, and we originally opened as an orphanage for boys. Today we have a residential treatment facility serving both boys and girls for 134 youth. And so through the department that I work in, we offer academic and career supports. Additionally, the main work that we do is through our Mercy model of care, which includes milieu, individual, group, and family therapy for our residents. We work with youth ages 11 through 21, and they come through an admissions process. They voluntarily commit to being here and receiving treatment at Mercy Home. Youth would benefit from healthy attachments and relationships, which are at the core of everything that we do here. Our youth have a history of trauma, abuse, and neglect, oftentimes having difficulties coping with stressors that they're experiencing in their lives. And oftentimes they're presenting with moderate educational or vocational challenges and struggling academically, typically 2 to 4 years behind academically. The youth would benefit from being removed from their home setting, whoever their primary guardian may be. The goal is to return to their family, or for our older youth, the goal is going to be independent living. And we will share more information out about Mercy Home, as well as if you have any potential referrals or questions about admissions process, we'll share more with the handouts tomorrow. So the webinar objectives are what were advertised, so hopefully that is what has led you to be on the webinar today. We are going to introduce with an understanding of trauma and adversity, understanding the impact of trauma on the brain and learning, teach some strategies to engage students, as well as effective responses to students' behaviors. And then we'll also provide some additional resources so that you can become a trauma-informed school or trauma-informed teacher. And much of that will be shared through the handouts and the follow-up email. All right, so to set the stage for today, I am going to explain more about trauma and adversity. So traumatic events are overwhelming, uncontrollable experiences that psychologically impact the victims. So we oftentimes see that with feelings of helplessness, vulnerability, loss of control, loss of safety, both while the event is happening and then afterwards as well, oftentimes what we see playing out in the behaviors of the youth that we work with. So there are different types of trauma, and the handout that I'll share will go into more detail. Typically, when people think of trauma, they think of something more acute trauma, which is a one-time traumatic event. Oftentimes, the youth that we are working with and what we'll really be referencing throughout today's webinar is complex developmental trauma. So that is multiple chronic, prolonged traumatic events. And those often occur in the context of the caregiving system. So when I think of the youth and families that we are working with, they are often intergenerational. So trauma that mom or grandma or dad may have experienced that then the child is experiencing as well. Maybe similar experiences, and again, can be intergenerational. The different types of trauma that youth may experience are abuse, and there are physical, sexual, emotional, and verbal abuse. Neglect, we tend to think of physical or medical neglect, but emotional, educational neglect can have a similar impact as well. Violence, whether that is domestic violence or community violence or experiences of war, and disrupted attachments. And we'll talk a lot more about attachment today. As I said, relationships and healthy attachments are at the core of a lot of what we do here at Mercy Home. And the youth that we work with who have experienced trauma have oftentimes had multiple disrupted attachments with their caregivers, perhaps being pulled out of different school placements, and as a result, that can cause some trauma for them. So one term that may be new to you, or a concept that may be new to you, is the concept of vicarious trauma. And the American Counseling Association defines that as emotional residue of exposure that counselors have from working with people as they hear the trauma stories. And what I want to really point out today is that I know we have people who are not counselors on today's webinar, but are educators and are teachers, and that you can experience that vicarious trauma as well, even though you are not a counselor. So I'm going to relate this to my experience a bit. Prior to returning to work at Mercy Home, I worked in a charter high school in a high needs neighborhood in Chicago. And in that area, there was a lot of community violence. My students were experiencing community violence, as well as they each had their own individual histories of trauma, often abuse or neglect, many involved in the DCFS system. And so as a result, I was also taking on that trauma. And so it took me a while to realize that, but we can all be impacted by our students' trauma, no matter our role in the school. So whether you're a counselor, teacher, school staff, school clerk, you can be impacted by the trauma that your students are experiencing. And as we talk about our model of care today, we are going to be talking about all of us as caregivers in the lives of our students. And so to be effective caregivers, we need to know how this vicarious trauma is impacting us. So we're going to start with a poll question just to see how you may be experiencing vicarious trauma in your own work. Okay, can you see it on your screen? Okay, just take another moment to complete all that, check all that apply to you. Okay, looks like the majority of you have participated. And so it looks like 97% of you work with students who have experienced trauma. Which is nearly all of you. 73% working in a neighborhood or community with violence. And then looks like also a majority of you are acknowledging that you have been impacted by it, while a slightly smaller percent have access to resources. So it's great that you are participating in this webinar today, because we want to be able to provide some resources for you so that you better know how to work with students who have experienced trauma, and also emphasize the importance of self-care. So the other part of today's title for the webinar is adversity, which might be a more common term than trauma, and might be one that you are able to relate to. So I'm going to share just the definition as well as a pretty well-known study. So adversity is an unfavorable or difficult situation or condition. So has a different definition from trauma, perhaps may seem less alarming in some situations. So there's a popular study known as the ACE study, and that is done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. So it's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and it began in 1995 and is continuing to look at the relationship between adverse childhood experiences and then what is experienced as adults with health risks, biomedical disease, and social functioning. So there's 3 types of ACEs: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So again, you might see some crossover here of the same terminology with defining trauma. But you'll see there's 10 ACEs total under those 3 types. And with this questionnaire, people identify what types of ACEs they have experienced. And what the research has shown is that 3 or more ACEs can have a significant impact and can have some lasting effects on health, behaviors, and life potential. So the work that we are doing is around life potential with graduation rates, academic achievement, and lost time from work. So acknowledging that, again, the experiences that our kids have early on in life are impacting their life potential. So if you look at this graphic here, this is looking at early experiences through death. And in the work that we are doing, it's oftentimes then impacting their neurodevelopment as well as social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. So especially in the academic and schooling years that we're working with kids, this is important to keep in mind. With this study, though, it's not all doom and gloom. This says early death at the top and disease, disability, and social problems. What's really important to know is that significant relationships can make a difference. And so that's where you can come in and having a significant and important relationship with a student who has experienced adversity in the past. So now that we have set the stage for understanding trauma and adversity, I am going to introduce you to our Mercy model of care, much of which is based on the work of the Trauma Center out of Boston, and they have the ARC model. And so I'm going to go through some principles of understanding of this model. So with this, it's a strengths-based model. I know I was just really focusing a lot on the negative and the trauma and adversity that kids experience. But kids are not simply a composite of their deficits. They're whole beings. They have strengths, vulnerabilities, challenges, and resources. And that's where we come in as some of those resources. The framework seeks to recognize factors that derail normative development, but working with youth, families, and systems to rebuild healthy developmental pathways. And systems is really where we come in. A school system is a critical part of that. So trauma can shift the course of healthy development, but it's important to remember that it doesn't occur in a vacuum, nor should service provision. And so we need to be working together for intervention, going beyond just treating the individual and working together. So I'm going to introduce you to a graphic of the ARC framework. And you'll see attachment is those green blocks. That is based on a safe caregiving system. Regulation, the red blocks, is the ability to regulate and tolerate experiences. And competency is the mastery of an array of tasks that are crucial to resilient outcomes. And our goal is trauma experience integration, which I like to think of as telling a new narrative of the experiences that the kids have had in the past and being able to share that and share their new experiences from a strengths-based perspective. So we have taken this framework and put it into a format and utilizing vocabulary that would be helpful for educators, and that is one of the handouts that we will be sharing with you. So take a look at that as we share that with you tomorrow. It'll be a little bit more in depth in understanding the different blocks of the ARC framework. So next, I'm going to be handing it over to our presenter, Andrea, who will talk more about this specific work with students.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for your patience. My name is Andrea Simari. I have worked for Mercy Home for Boys and Girls for about 3 years. I'm a school resource coordinator, meaning that I work with our young people, helping them with educational challenges, navigating the educational system. I'm really happy to talk to everyone today. I feel like I'm a former teacher, and when I was teaching 3rd grade, I really wish that I would have had some of this information. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing it with teachers just like yourself. So just to give a heads up, Mercy Home goes through several days of training. Mercy Home employees go through several days of training on trauma and the impact of trauma and how to combat it and teach our youth skills that they need, and we're really just going to give you a taste here today. But we've been going out to schools and sharing this with more teachers, so please email us if you are interested in more information. My part is really going to focus on the effect of trauma on the brain. And then the second part will be how teachers can approach this in the classroom when they're seeing this within their students. So some of the obstacles that we see youth facing when they come into school when they've been impacted by trauma are their ability to process information, the ability to distinguish between threatening and non-threatening situations. So for example, if you have a student in a classroom and they're sitting by the window, as many of our youth do, they may hear a dog barking outside, and a traumatized youth, their brain may not be able to distinguish if this is a threatening situation for them or if it's non-threatening. And since they're inside the classroom, this isn't a threatening situation for them, but their brain may respond like it is threatening, going into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And that can present issues in the classroom. Another thing we see is something that Liz mentioned as well, is they have difficulty forming a trusting, appropriate relationship with adults. And this is the irony of it all, is that, as Liz said, this is the one thing that they need. They need relationships with adults to become resilient. And this is one of the things that they struggle with. So it's interesting, some of the youth that I've worked with that have made the most progress have gone through very traumatic experiences, including those ACEs like abuse and neglect. Well, the ones that make the most progress that I think are the ones that have that grandmother or mother or uncle who has stuck with it through the whole thing, through all their trauma, and has stuck with them, and so they become resilient. And really the takeaway for caregivers and teachers is that you can be that person that can make the child resilient. So that's really how important your role is as caregivers for them. And the next one really is just the ability to regulate their emotional state. And I know we see this in kids all the time of kind of going in and out of these emotions. However, for traumatized youth, it's more severe. The next thing I want to talk about is the impact of it, particularly on the classroom and attention and learning. So as I said before, traumatized youth have difficulty paying attention. Their brain is kind of conditioned to always be looking for traumatic stimuli. And in that case, because they're looking for traumatic stimuli, they're not always focusing on what as teachers, what we want them to be focusing on. The youth may be, especially youth who have been abused, may be appearing inattentive. However, it's because they're actually reading the mood and body language of the person who's talking to them, trying to see if there may be a threatening situation coming up. This can obviously present a lot of challenges in the classroom, because if we're teaching a science lesson and the traumatized youth is reading our body language, they're obviously not learning the science that we're trying to communicate to them, and they're not verbally processing it. So it really presents challenges in the classroom, and maybe why a lot of these traumatized students are struggling. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the brain today. However, I'm not a neurologist, so we will not be using this brain. We will be using this one, because everyone has one. So we're going to use your fist as our brain today. Looking at your little brain here, your brainstem is going to be your wrist. So this is going to control your heart rate. Your brainstem controls your heart rate, digestion, immune system. Going up, we have the limbic system, which is your thumb, which is kind of tucked in under your fingers, and that is your emotional core. This is where fear and anxiety is triggered. I like to tell our youth that this is their lizard brain, this is their animal brain. So if they were just a lizard, this is all that they would have, is this little emotional core. And when something's trying to catch the animal, then this is how they respond with that part of their brain. Going up, your fingers, the top of your hand here, is going to be your cortex. It's going to be your rational brain. This is where we store memory, language, and then going up further is your fingertips, and this is your frontal cortex, and that's where all of our executive functions are stored. And at Mercy Home, we teach a lot about executive functions, because we know that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until, some scientists are saying, between 20 and 30 years old. So this is where impulse control is stored. This is where we learn how to organize, problem solve, make decisions. And foremost, this is the only part of our brain that tells us to stop. So when knowing this, a really good visual that we've used with teachers and students is when we are experiencing fear and anxiety and stress or traumatic things, we flip our lids. And when our lid is flipped, we enter into fight, flight, or freeze mode, and all we have is our little lizard brain. Our rational thought is turned off, language, memory, digestion, our immune system, and really what we need for school is executive functions. So all that decision making, all that organizing that we've taught them, that is now turned off. So when looking at this model, we can look at this model as anyone. So anyone can flip their lid. So we're just going to do a little audience engagement here. Will you please raise your hand if you have ever flipped your lid? Okay, I'm seeing some hands go up. All right. Yeah, I'm raising my hand too. But raise your hand if you flipped your lid. And of course, I mean, everyone flips their lid at some point at home, in the classroom. It happens. And now that you know that it happens, it's even more important for you to remain in your rational brain when you're teaching. So anyone's lid can flip. However, with students with complex developmental trauma, their lids are flipping more frequently into smaller threats. So whereas, as we all are well-adjusted adults, right, we only flip our lids when we're really experiencing a lot of fear and anxiety. And so, for example, I was doing a presentation one time and a door slammed, and everyone in the room kind of like jumped up a little bit for a second. We flipped our lids for a moment, but as we all realized, it was just a door slam, and we could come back into our rational brains. For youth who are experiencing complex developmental trauma, they're gonna flip their lid more easily, and they're gonna have more difficulty coming back into their rational brains, realizing that they're in a safe environment. So now raise your hand if you've ever seen a student flip their lid in your classroom. All right, we're definitely seeing some hands. Yeah, it happens. It happens a lot. So especially the youth that are traumatized, and it can happen to youth that are not traumatized as well, obviously. So really the next part of the presentation is really going to be thinking about like how do we approach youth who have flipped their lids. Oopsies. All right, so when we're thinking about youth who have flipped their lids, there's a few ways that we can think about it. And I really like this visual here about the window of tolerance. Oops, sorry guys. So I like to think of the window of tolerance as social work's kind of form of the zone of proximal development. So as teachers, we know that we want all of our students in the ZPD in order to teach them. So this is like the emotional ZPD. So this is where we want students to learn. We want them inside this window, inside the calm and engaged zone. So if they are not calm and engaged and they have flipped their lid, they can become hyper aroused, which is kind of like stuck on, pacing, yelling, screaming, cursing, throwing things. Or they can become like kind of stuck off, hypo-aroused in the rest and digest mode. So that's when we see students who are with their head down a lot, really sleepy, really unmotivated. They're kind of in that mode. So just like the zone of proximal development, we want kids in the calm and engaged zone so they can learn. So if we have a student who's cursing at us, who's throwing things, that's not a good state to be learning in. Remember, they're not rationally processing any of your anything you're telling them at that point. They're of course not learning. So we also don't want them stuck off. We don't want them hypo-aroused. They're not going to be processing rationally either. So we really want them in this calm and engaged zone, and we're going to give you some tools to help you get your students in the calm and engaged zone, and you also might just recognize some things that you're doing already that gets them to that place. So let's go through a little example here. So we have a youth who has flipped their lid. It may be for a variety of reasons, but they're appearing either edgy, angry, energetic, or maybe they're just really checked out and tired. Maybe they're bored. But let's go with the edgy or angry for this example. So let's say they're, cursing at you, they're appearing upset. Right, we might have, then in comes the like partially frustrated teacher. Maybe this is the 10th time that this student has done this today, and we're, a little frustrated. Our lid may be slightly, beginning to flip here. This threatening teacher may appear, this teacher, hopefully not threatening, but may appear threatening to the student with the flipped lid. Ideally, then we have the teacher self-regulate. Maybe they take a few deep breaths, maybe they walk away for a moment, and they engage the student with curiosity and ask them what's going on. Try to fill their need. Then, ideally, we have the calm and engaged teacher able to process with the now calm and engaged youth, and at this point we can help promote new skills, support, and have the youth take accountability for their actions. And now their brain is now ready to learn back in your classroom, back in that calm, engaged window. What we don't want is this. And I know some of us have seen this before, so raise your hand if you've been here or you've seen this. I know that I have seen this, and it's pretty ugly. All right, we got a few hand raises there. Yeah, it's pretty ugly, and it really doesn't take us anywhere. No learning is going on. The child part of the caregiver brain is engaging with the child part of the youth brain, a functional 2-year-old, right? They're not verbal processing, there's no memory, there's no decision making, and very little growth is happening. So we are going to talk about how we can avoid this and what are some strategies for the classroom. So we've put together a teacher's toolbox that I hope you guys get a lot of use out of, because we've had a lot of teachers give us positive feedback about it. But it's broken into the three levels, the three domains of ARC: attachment, regulation, and competencies. And these tools are going to help you avoid those lid flips yourself. They're going to help kids when their lid is flipped to come back into that calm and engaged zone. So when thinking about attachment, we're thinking about relationships. How can we build relationships with our students so when they come back each day, they feel like they're in a safe, secure environment? So I know there's that student who you wish sometimes when you're coming to school just wouldn't show up that day, because they're really challenging. And you know that if maybe they weren't there, that it would just, the class would just go maybe a little bit better. Well, now that you've identified that student, that is your job. That is your job, to make that student feel welcome. And one of the ways you can make that student feel welcome is to give them, check in with them each day. Ask them how they're doing. Even if it's a quick, an extra hello, that's going to make them feel more safe in the classroom and begin to form a trusting relationship with you. Inquire about kids' special interests. That's going to help with your relationship as well. I remember as a third grade teacher one time, as I was leaving school, I stopped in the gym because my students were playing basketball, and the student that I had struggled with all year, could not have been happier that I had showed up to his game. And I was kind of taken aback by it. I was like, what? He usually didn't like to see me. But that one thing of just going to his game and seeing him slightly changed our relationship. Was it a miracle worker? No. But it showed him that I cared. It showed him that I was committed to helping him. And the next day we could talk about it. It provided some motivation for him. Another thing that I like to tell teachers for attachment is use your breaks to recharge yourself. There will always be never-ending work at schools. Liz and I both have seen that. But it's really important that in those 20 minutes that you get off a day, that you're taking care of yourself so you can work through the next 3 hours of school. I was a teacher in my third and fourth year of teaching where if someone may have stopped into my classroom, you may, on a break, you may have seen me lying on my carpet or resting, taking that time to recharge. The grading can always wait. So moving on to regulation, another tool, and this is really to help kids regulate their emotions in the classroom, help them stay calm and engaged, right? Use a bell ringer, right? I know that bell ringers are often used to gauge familiarity with the topic, but it can also get all your students on the same page to be calm and engaged in that window and ready to absorb all the other information. Another thing we like to tell teachers is prompt youth for transitions, whether this is transitions to another class, having a field trip the next day, a change in the schedule. Let those traumatized students know. And yeah, you might have to tell them a few times, but letting them know is going to make your classroom even safer, and is going to help them regulate their emotions on a daily basis. I know teachers don't always like to hear this, but allow youth to manipulate objects during class. This can really help with emotional regulation. If you were to come to Mercy Home, and I know many of you have been here, you would find that we have all sorts of toys and fidgets around the home. And you know what? Sometimes it's the adults that use them the most to regulate, but kids also pick them up. And in a tense meeting, you'll find that the kids are squeezing the stress ball or moving around the tangle, and that's allowing them to engage in the meeting while kind of getting some of that anxiety out. Moving on to competencies, this is what I think the schools that we work with are strongest at, but checking homework and helping with organization. A lot of our youth struggle with organization, and it really needs to be monitored. Another thing is just sharing your own skills with students, making sure that you're telling them what you do, what you're interested in, what challenges that you've been through. Okay, so now we're going to go kind of continue on this mode of like how to help students when they flip their lid, and really this is a mindset part. So it's viewing behaviors through the competency lens. So when you have a student who's triggered in the classroom, maybe they've cursed at you or they're yelling, right? It's really thinking of this challenging behavior as a result of a lack of a skill and not of ill will. So this is the mindset that everyone, including all your students, even those troublemakers, would do the right thing if they had the skills to do so. So this is really a mindset that Mercy Home has taken on, because it really focuses on the skill building instead of just the consequences and being upset with kids that they can't make the right decisions. And I always like to do a plug here for discipline systems. So we really believe that a discipline system should aim to teach students new approaches and those new skills to solving these problems instead of just consequencing them. Discipline systems should have consequences, as we do at Mercy Home, but they should be connected with teaching skills and new approaches, and that's really going to enable kids to make those right choices if they have the skills that are required. This can be kind of a switch for some teachers. I think a lot of there's some mindsets out there like that kids are, and students especially who are traumatized, are purposefully making decisions that would hurt them or other people. And it's really been really impactful for myself and for staff at Mercy Home to change that mindset and to be thinking about, okay, how can we help this kid, give them the skills to do what's required. So we're going to do a little bit of arc in action here, since I showed you the lid flipping teacher and the lid flipping youth. This is really how we want things to go in the classroom. So first we're going to start with a safe classroom environment. This is going to be your baseline. I know this is a lot of what teachers work on in the beginning of the year, but really none of ARC can happen without a safe environment. It's that really what we focus on in the beginning with our students as well. So we're in a safe environment, and we see a student acting out here who's on the right. He looks kind of upset there. Maybe he's yelling, maybe he's throwing a tantrum. So this is, we're on the left here. We're observing, right? We're gonna reflect. We're gonna get curious and not furious. We're gonna think, what's driving the behavior? How is this student feeling? How am I feeling? Am I ready to help them? And then we're really going to observe. This part might take 10 seconds. You may get a little bit more time. It's going to go pretty quickly. Then we're going to regulate and modulate ourselves. So we're going to take steps to calm yourself back into your window, right? This is the caregiver, the staff, because remember, we're not able to approach a youth with their lid flipped unless our lid is down and we are in our rational brain. So for me, this is like taking a few deep breaths. For other people, I've seen staff who carry around bottles of water. It's taking a drink of water. It's making sure that you're able to approach them. And sometimes, because some of our students are frustrating, we get frustrated with them, and that's okay. But that's the time that you need to recognize that maybe I can't approach the student right now. Maybe I just need to wait if what they're doing is safe, and maybe I just need to wait until I can approach them, or maybe I need to tag out. We do a lot of that at Mercy Home too, of people coming in when we can't regulate ourselves to encounter the student. So in an ideal world, we've regulated ourselves as a caregiver, and now it's time to respond. We're going to reconnect with the student. We're going to respond in a safe, calm, and rational approach. Ideally, we're going to repair the harm that has been done, and then we're going to bring them back into the classroom and into the routine when he or she is ready. So this is a pretty like quick view, kind of the like outside, the large view of what we want to be doing when a student is flipping their lid, and we're going to get more into the nitty-gritty next. So, and this is more, these are our choices for effective responses to students' behavior. So this is the respond part of the last slide. So we're kind of zooming in here. So these are choices for effective response for student behavior. The first one is really just, teachers use this a lot, is they ignore. If the behavior is safe, ignore it. See where it goes. Watch, reflect, like learn what the student is doing. Right? This can, this way you can decide, you know, and learn from the student's behavior. However, if you're just ignoring the behavior, there's really no opportunity for direct learning. Another choice you have, and one that we use often, is collaborate with the youth. If a student is constantly, you know, talking out of turn, or some of those behaviors that we see a lot, like talk to the student after class, empathize with them. Like when I was in school, you know, it was sometimes hard to get the teacher's attention. I know how you feel. Share your concern, right? I know that you want my attention, but I really need you to raise your hand so we can take turns. And then ask the student for a solution. We have youth around here who come up with really creative solutions that we might not have thought of. For hand raising in particular, we sometimes do like, well, the teacher and the student have a secret signal that they use if they need the teacher's attention. This is really when we get maximum learning potential. And the next part is, the next strategy would be to set limits. And at Mercy Home staff, we work a lot on this. This is probably one of the more challenging things we do. And these are kind of 4 simple rules that we follow for setting limits. Make them simple and clear. So just like we would, you know, talk to a student, want to like talk in really simple language, especially if their lid is partially flipped, because they may not quite be hearing us. We want to be reasonable about the limit, right? You can usually tell if someone has their lid flipped, that they'll probably, a caregiver has their lid flipped, that they'll probably give an unreasonable limit, right? We can't take recess away for the rest of the year. That's not reasonable. But we can take recess away for 1 day. The next one is make your limit enforceable. Again, when our lids are flipped, we often make unenforceable limits. But if we're in a calm and engaged state, we'll also often think of things that are enforceable. And lastly, make it individualized. So if this student has been kicked out of recess every single day, you know, for the past 2 weeks, then maybe we need to individualize it a little bit for them to make it so there's more learning potential involved. As we're zooming in here, getting to the end, I just want to go over some guidelines for effective response and when you're dealing with a student who has their lid flipped, some do's and don'ts here. So do isolate the situation, make it so you've zeroed in on just the situation and you've taken the youth out from like the attention of others. Do set the limit, right? But don't get into a power struggle. Going back and forth with the youth and arguing with them is going to make both of your lid flips, and it's not going to get anywhere. So we do a lot of avoiding power struggles here. You know, do vent to your coworkers, right? Like, that's okay. Do a vent to your family, but don't hold it in, but make sure that it's not affecting your work as well. The last one here that I want to point out is be aware of your nonverbals and tone. As I spoke about earlier, oftentimes kids are looking at our facial gestures, our hands, what they're doing, and we have to be aware of those things. I had a student one time, and we were in a walking out of a conference that was really, really challenging, and I probably like had furrowed my brow a little bit, and the student turned to me and was like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "What?" Like, I'm just thinking. And he was like, "Well, you look really mad." And I had to explain to him, like, "Well, I'm concerned and I'm thinking about like what to do next." Um, but he was really aware of those nonverbals. All right, so we've been through a lot here. Liz and I have done a lot of slides. I hope you guys have some questions for us because we're getting to the end here. So go ahead and type in some questions as I finish up. Today you've really, just to wrap up, you've learned about the impact of trauma on the brain. Particularly Liz shared what trauma is and the ACE study, which really shows us that it has a real impact on people's lives. Then we've gone to effective response to behavior. I hope I gave you a few ideas. I like to say that these presentations, I hope that at least a teacher can take away one idea and put it into their classroom tomorrow. Some of those teacher toolbox ideas take no planning at all. It just means like going in and checking in with a student who consistently struggles in your classroom. And we're really hoping that this leads to a safe and well-regulated classroom. We know that an hour of professional development and webinar won't make miracles, but we hope that it has kind of given you something to think about. And we are going to send along a link in the chat for an evaluation, and you will get the handouts by email. But we'd like to answer a few questions. So if you have any questions, please send them on. We haven't gotten a ton. So, okay, we have one here. Okay, so the question is, how important is self-disclosure when it comes down to building your relationships with students dealing with trauma? So I would say that everyone has their boundaries, and you kind of have to decide how much you are going to disclose to students. A personal story is I choose to share some things, but I don't choose to share others. And for example, that's kind of a silly one, but we were doing a group with the guys and talking about how we were feeling. And right now I have a pretty visible small burn on my arm, and I shared with them how I burned my arm because that was affecting how I was feeling. But I've chosen not to share with kids things from my personal life. Right? And so I think some self-disclosure is important, so you're showing them that you're a real person and that you get hurt too and you can be sad and affected, but you're not sharing so much with them that they might know too many details about your personal life. Thanks for the question. That was a really good one. Any other questions? Feel free to type them in the questions, or we can also see the chat. Okay. All right, as you're typing in all those good questions, I'm going to share the evaluation with you. It's going to be in the chat. It's a SurveyMonkey valuation here. Yep, there it is. We'd really appreciate you completing this. It will also be in the email that you get later. It really helps us know if you're interested in viewing more webinars or learning more about Mercy Home and just how we did today. We got another question here. So the question is, what kind of manipulatives would be safe in a classroom? So we have, well, I'm holding a beanbag here. I would say this is safe. Like anything in a classroom, you've got to set limits around it. So I know in my third grade classroom, I didn't really like to give them a ball because I feel like there's too much tendency to throw a ball. So I like the bean bags. They're also really good tangles that just kind of like sit in kids' hands. I also like to think of something kind of discreet so it's not super noticeable that that a kid has a manipulative. Um, we get some really great ones just like off the internet that I think if you had like a bin of them in your classroom and kids could kind of just choose them after you've set limits about, keeping them to yourself and not throwing them, stuff like that. We do find that kids kind of and adults really uh, kind of tend towards the same one over and over. You kind of get familiar with one and it helps you reduce that anxiety. Thanks for the question. We have one more here. Okay, sorry, one more question here. How do you sustain your optimism or support when the student's behavior does not seem to be improving despite everyone's effort? This is something we deal with a lot in talking to teachers. And the thing I find myself saying over and over is that trauma is about healing and not about control. And healing takes a long time. And I know that's something that's really hard to hear, but every day is like a small drop in the bucket. And you're not going to see, sometimes telling teachers that they're not going to see results right away takes a little pressure off of them, but it also means that you have to keep going. And so I think, personally, how I sustain is really talking with coworkers, and we do a lot of venting around here, but also a lot of problem solving, and it kind of puts our youth's challenges into perspective of we have a youth that's really struggling in school, but then we have a youth that's doing really well. And so seeing how each youth progresses over time and remembering that we have youth gone through this before and can get through it, I think helps me sustain my optimism. But that definitely is a challenge, and especially what Liz talked about with vicarious trauma, it can really like hit the heart of our work and really affect caregivers over the long term. Yeah, the other thing to think about is like I said, the drops in the bucket, but really we talk a lot about planting seeds. Like we're just planting seeds in the ground that will one day flourish. The hard part is sometimes we don't get to see the kids flourish, but it's like all those drops in the bucket that make a difference. And it's funny because a lot of our youth come back because a lot of our youth call Mercy Home home. And it's really amazing to see the changes that they made over the course of their life. And that helps sustain some optimism as well. Yeah, so our next question is about self-care tips. So we do a lot around self-care at Mercy Home because it's really important for caregivers to be taking care of themselves. So one thing that we try to do just is to limit the hours that we work, making it, working reasonable hours. We also try to, when we talk about self-care, we talk about it in a few different realms, three of them being how you taking care of your physical self, is it exercise, getting fresh air, things like that. How are you taking care of your mind? So for myself, I like to do crosswords, I like to read on my time off, and then how are you taking care of your spirit? That's like one way to think about getting some balance. Another thing is that when we talk about self-care, is talking about systems of support and who are you reaching out to and talking about your work with, and making sure that you're getting the support you need emotionally. I always think of I can't take care and heal other kids if I am not taking care of myself. And so getting into some of those routines of taking care of yourself really can be impactful in your work. And I think as teachers often, like, we're not inclined to be caretakers of ourselves. We're inclined to take care of others, but really remembering that we can't take care of others unless we're okay ourselves. Okay, so we just have a few, we're kind of nearing the end here. As a reminder, if you dropped out at some point, we'll be sending you some handouts. There'll be, the PowerPoint will be in there too. This session will also be recorded, so I think you'll be able to access the recording as well. And then there'll also be some information about admissions and how to refer kids to Mercy Home. And you can always look at our website for more information about Mercy Home. Thank you so much for joining Liz and I today. This has been a really exciting opportunity for Mercy Home, and I hope everyone learned a lot. You have our emails here. Feel free to reach out to get more resources or to ask us about our work. And I hope everyone has a good night. Thank you.